Happy Friday, everybody. I think this can be the last privacy chat of the year. I might post a little video clip here or there. LinkedIn wants us to do that. Those of you who, follow what the platforms are doing, are aware that there's been a big move away from social content that goes to your friends and text posts to what I guess initially TikTok and then Instagram and Facebook and now even LinkedIn seem to be evolving towards, which is we're sort of watching streams of algorithmically selected content that might be influenced by the fact that maybe you're friends with somebody, but might significantly be more influenced by these are the kinds of things that people like you seem to be watching. This is what you want, and the platforms are steering us, and LinkedIn is steering us in that direction. But hopefully you'll all be doing more interesting things next week than keeping up with your social media. Anyway, I'm joined today by Tatiana Rice, who leads our federal, state legislative efforts and provides wise counsel on all sorts of things, not just to me and the rest of the team, but so many in the broader tech policy stakeholder community. And Tatiana and I are going to talk about her team's not predictions. I think we know after working in this area for a very long time, he, she, they who predict end up actually never being accountable because nobody ever seems to go back and be like, you predicted this. So it ends
up. People do remember.
We remember. We keep track. It's a lot of hot air. I think it's much more useful to say, look, these are the forces that are, bubbling, and, predicting when anything erupts is a fool's errand, especially in this world where the president might head suddenly in a new direction and in Congress and the chaotic world. But I think understanding the major trends and forces that are pressing against each other, let you be a sophisticated assessor of, what you need to be thinking about and watching. So we'll talk about that. But given that there was a bit of news today that in early January, the House Energy Commerce, the Republican-led group that has been working on privacy legislation, is expected to have something out. Politico had that scoop. Not really brand new news, though, right, Tatiana? We were expecting that they were saying they were going to do this. I guess what's maybe surprising is we thought from what we heard and others heard that there was more impetus around moving kids-related bills and that maybe the privacy activity would follow the kids. Now, the kids' bills are out from House Energy and Commerce, but it's still early in the process. So maybe, I don't know, were you surprised? Are we expecting this? Anything new here?
Yeah, I've been hearing these rumblings for a while, Jules, as you mentioned. Generally had heard that folks were trying to focus on the kids' issues. Even short term, we're like, will we see a federal privacy law or legislation by the end of the year? And I think most people were like, highly unlikely. Haven't seen a ton of drafts circulating yet. But news that it could come early January still is, I think, pretty significant. Given that there's already so much happening between youth safety and youth privacy and chatbots and AI, just adding in federal privacy legislation into that, I think is a interesting development. It could be really helpful, especially as we're thinking about some of these preemption debates between the federal government and states.
Yeah, and we've made the point, I think, for quite some time that very hard to do AI legislation if you don't have underlying privacy legislation. And we've also made the point that if you're pushing this because you want to, open up a path for AI leadership, the bills that are today, the laws that are today creating a bit more pressure on, AI are the 19 or 20, state laws that have things like in Maryland, strict data minimization, California's entire kind of algorithmic regulation structure built under their privacy law. Now, I don't know that connection seems to be well made yet. on the Hill.
Yeah, it's wild to me because I feel like I say it quite often. I'm like, move in federal privacy, like we'll preempt some of these state laws, not only just on privacy, but I think on AI, because they oftentimes do come from a singular nexus. And particularly, we've heard that they likely are going to be looking to the Texas Data Privacy Act as a potential model. Of course, Senator Cruz is from there. They have had a law for a while now that the AG has already started enforcing. That also does have implications for AI, though. Like Jules, you'll probably find this interesting looking back through the law. They do treat pseudonymous data as personal data. So you have all of those restrictions for AI development if any of your pseudonymous data is being used for AI training.
I think I'm known internally at FPF as the maniac about pseudonymous data because we've argued for a very long time that it's so hard to define personal information in a way that satisfies everybody, and it ends up often being quite broad. And if the goal is, making sure ad tech can't circumvent it and so forth, I get that, but it ends up often limiting real valuable research. Governments trying to understand your spending in this area. How does it affect others? Healthcare, if you want to understand how diseases spread, you need to have location, right? You can't have location in a data set, and you cannot have precise location in a data set and think that you're de-identifying it. And so some of the adjacent items that are so valuable for utility to data start creating risks of re-identification, but can be cabined in a way. So let's call it pseudonymous and let's create some flexibility, maybe to use it for research, maybe to share it under some very restrictive conditions. And indeed, this is what Europe is in the midst of doing, but it hasn't yet reopened the debate. So hopefully the Republicans, and let's note, right, what we're expecting here is a Republican. Although the Republicans have the majority, the House majority is really, really lean. And so doing things that, seriously move in the House do end up needing some bipartisanship unless they're kind of being locked into some giant, package where, it has to happen and the government's going to shut down or that sort of thing. And so, yes, this is a Republican effort, but I guess we wouldn't rule out that there will be, strategically, they want to figure out what's the Republican position here, and then where is it that they can broaden. And that's the plan, it seems like, with the kids' bills as well, right? This was, even though some of the kids' bills were previously bipartisan bills, they put out sort of a Republican package. Some of the Democratic sponsors are now no longer on there, and the negotiation process now will ensue. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. Privacy on the federal level has been fairly bipartisan for how many years at this point, right? It's something a lot of people do care about. But as always, the devil is in the details on how far you're going, particularly when we do now have this kind of consensus approach, which I think they are probably likely going to take, that is like the Washington Privacy Act framework, but there are small deviations between the different laws that still call into question certain preemption issues, such as California covers employee data, Texas does not. How would you think about those differentiations?
Yeah, and the members have been clear in this Republican House Energy Commerce effort that they were starting from a notion of, we don't really want to be taking away key rights that many of the states already put in place that are popular and well established. Maybe, frankly, that's a pretty smart move, given that you see on the AI debate how things have been derailed by not fully recognizing that on very key issues, kids and a number of others, wiping out those protections was just not going to be politically tenable. Here, the committee started with the notion of there are laws in place that are in place a couple of years. People have core rights that taking away, some of the very popular protections, not tenable. And so it appears to be that they have looked at where there's a lot of consensus, where there are protections or prohibitions that are in many state laws, and
Mhm.
kind of, wrap those up, and then how they are dealing with maybe some of the outlier areas where there are big splits. Some states have the additional, health protections and so forth.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that'll be really interesting to note is, again, because Texas has been on the books for a while, there's not only just the Texas privacy law, there's the biometrics law, and then there was the recently enacted TREGA AI law, which also includes updates to the biometrics law in that AI law. So it's not just one law to be looking at. There's an entire ecosystem in Texas that I'd be curious if they're considering or just looking at the text.
For those of us who focus on the states being the laboratories of democracy, this is certainly one example of how the early cogitating for those ideas are now shaping the federal. Okay, so predictions. No, not predictions. What did we call it?
Not predictions. I think we call it 5 key questions that could influence legislators next year. And of course,
so your first
you're always going to be great in there.
So you started out by flagging that at the state level, we no longer saw a trend of comprehensive laws the way for the last couple of years we've been seeing at the state level, but rather very sector specific, protection specific laws.
Yeah, so for the past few years, we are always in a frenzy chasing the comprehensive privacy law proposals that are happening throughout the states. And those certainly still got introduced, but this is the first year that we haven't seen any actually get enacted this year. What did happen is kind of, as you noted, Jules, 2 things. One, we saw certain states update their existing data privacy laws. We saw that in Connecticut. Colorado also updated some of theirs through rulemaking as well as some of the sector-specific bills getting enacted as well. So I will say, and Jordan Francis follows this so closely, he is definitely the expert on this. I want to make sure everybody follows him on LinkedIn, that there are still bills that are live going into 2026, and there are ones that could change the trajectory of the no new privacy laws, and that's in Maine, Vermont, and I think Massachusetts, all of which kind of adopt some level of a Maryland-style data minimization provision, which has been subject to a lot of criticism and conversation around, like, is this protective? What does this actually mean? How does this function in practice? How does this actually differ from existing data minimization?
We saw age signals popping up everywhere. Thoughts on that direction?
Oh man, that is a messy bag that will be so fascinating because it does remain also an area where we're following not only what the states are doing, but there's so much litigation that's happening at the same time. So there's been this ongoing sweep of different types of lawsuits on First Amendment grounds on this issue of age verification and age signals. And this year we saw kind of a new novelish approach around the framework, moving from either knowledge standards and service level age assurance to now moving it up to the App Store level and having those 2 different models from both California and then the other model in Texas, Louisiana, and Utah. The Texas one actually just had a hearing on whether it will be subject to an injunction this Tuesday. I think we're hoping to actually get a decision by the end of the year or before the holidays, but we're keeping a close eye because I do think that will play a role as to which of these frameworks ends up prevailing next year and into the future.
Some of the folks who were at the argument told us that they thought it went very well, or well for those who were challenging the law. But we also heard from a former member of the AG team there, who's very savvy about the courts and the litigation in Texas, that the judge who's handling this, has previously taken a very narrow view of what is speech. You got to be speaking it, and so questions about getting access to content and so forth. He may not be the best judge to be running to if that's your goal. A reminder for anybody who has not already paid attention: January 1 is when the Texas App Store Accountability Act kicks in. Your app developer team is working on this already. Now, maybe they're talking to you, maybe they're not. Hopefully they are, because incredibly sensitive and important key decisions are going to be made as people start getting information about which users of their app are underage, and whether they will be blocked from getting access to your app if there's a new download at least, or whether you'll be able to update it, or whether you need to figure out how to set up a COPPA compliant process or restrict kids, teens. Anyway, lots of work to do. Apple and Google have put out some degree of guidance, but there's still a lot of questions about going through the implementation. So if you thought this was simply about Apple and Google and Meta, all with different views on this, this is now about what those stores are going to do and how they're going to provide information and get parental permission, and then what you're going to do. And the challenge may be that the parental permission, remember, COPPA has a very specific verified parental consent mechanism. Apple and Google may ask parents, do you want to let your teen have access to this particular app? That doesn't amount to your verified parental consent, and they can't really, because the VPC, you need to say, you the activator, need to say, here's what I do, right? Apple and Google don't know exactly what you do with the data. So exactly how apps will be able to leverage this process, or whether they'll be blocking and so forth, we are waiting to see what happens.
Yeah. And I think an additional wrinkle in that hasn't yet happened, but we've been hearing a little bit about, is how the Federal Trade Commission is thinking about this, right? They have a January 28th workshop on age verification on this issue, when under their existing purview, like, age verification may not be a part of usually kind of their authority and enforcement areas. So looking to see how that workshop might be fitting into their 2026 agenda, I think, is another thing to be keeping an eye out on.
The chairman has certainly signaled in statements and some of the other decisions that he sees age verification, certainly by the big players, as sort of a key landscape that then other players can rely on. He's been very, very clear that he is going to focus on kids more so initially than AI. They have the 6 feet out. They're learning things. They care about kids and chatbots. We're hearing about a lot of hiring going on, actually, and promotions and activity at the FTC, sort of staffing more significantly around kids. The chairman has said he's going to use COPPA to the full extent that it is usable. So stay tuned. Okay. What else did we not predict? We talked about year of the chatbots.
Yes, so much activity on chatbots this year, particularly in the second half of this year so far. And we've seen this across every jurisdiction, every political party. We've seen it introduced and enacted in a number of states. It's been introduced in Congress. There's congressional investigations. There's the FTC investigations. There's litigation. This is a hot issue if you are in the chatbot space. And of course, that also determines what is the definition of a chatbot, right? Chatbots have been around for a while. Customer service has used chatbots for decades at this point. But now we're moving into a space of LLM and machine learning that are highly personalized to users' experiences. So I think a lot of lawmakers and regulators are really concerned about that. And I've said this many times before, our team always says it, but like, chatbots is where all of the different areas of privacy debates, AI debates, and youth privacy and safety debates all come together into a really complicated issue.
Well, what's particularly complicated about it, right, is it's easy to think of a chatbot as this, like, pretending to be a human, super conversational type tool. The reality is, LLMs are sitting behind these things, and sophisticated ability to respond to users' queries are sitting behind now a vast amount of customer service and education and intersection. And so where one draws the line between interacting with anything online, and there is, AI behind the scenes making it work right, or responding to my query, and then, this is a thing that just seems to be talking to you about sensitive things in a very personal way, is super tricky. There are all these education tools, for instance, now, Khan Amigos, one very well known from, Khan Academy, which has opened up like learning to a vast audience of kids, particularly homeschool kids and others. And, the system there does, and parents have access and oversight and teachers. And so there's a lot of protections, but how you respond to a kid who maybe got, 99 out of 100 and is like a whiz and is like going on to the next level when they get something wrong. And then how do you respond to the kid who's struggling and, got it all wrong? The language, according to educational experts, can and should be different and sort of nuanced and help promote education and learning, right? So that's a chatbot, and it's doing the good sorts of things with a lot of guardrails, with a lot of oversight that we want doing, acting as a teacher, right?
Yeah.
Or as a tutor. And so I think we're worried that some of these proposals, obviously we can't have kids, using things that are crazy and dangerous and, push them in the wrong directions. But maybe the answer is that for the younger audience, you have more oversight, right? Maybe for the youngest, parents should have a lot of control, and maybe for others, extra guardrails are built in. But the idea of restricting it completely the way we see some of the proposals really gets a lot of inequity.
Yeah, it's really tricky because it also raises the question of, like, as you mentioned, like, this is part of product design. Like, you want your products to be engaging and responsive to the needs of the user, right? But then there's been all these horrible, egregious cases where somebody's using a chatbot and it results in somebody taking their own life, or it results in them committing harm to somebody else. And so that obviously is something that lawmakers, regulators want to mitigate. Even when we're talking about things that we think are low risk, like educational tools. I was talking to somebody recently that there used to be these Dear Santa letters that people would send over the internet, right? And seemed pretty innocuous, but kids would be putting in information to just those Dear Santa letters about abuse and issues within their home. So it still raises some of those core youth safety concerns that people have, but you want to be able to facilitate those educational uses because it really can be beneficial for a lot of cases for people to be able to learn better.
I remember working on the policy for the AIM, the AOL Instant Messenger Santa bot, and kids, could message Santa. And when we sat down with the team and we're like, what are you going to do when the kid messages, my dad is beating me, this person is doing this inappropriate thing, or I'm thinking of hurting myself? Then they're like, oh, that's not our intended use. I'm like, yeah, but we have, I don't know, I think at the time there were 30, 50 million, whatever, it was a big number at the time, users. So they're going to be, we predict, several hundred of those. So what's our policy going to be? How are we going to deal with it? And they're like, oh, but that's not the intended use case. Well, anything that happens at millions and so on and so forth. So item number 4 was health and location data dominating. Will it continue to dominate the conversations? We just saw some litigation this week, didn't we? Or push against the proposed New York Health Information Privacy Act.
Yeah, so that is on the governor's desk right now, as is the New York RAISE Act, which is the Frontier Foundation Model Bill. I think we're still unclear. I think we think it's likely going to get signed, but I think there has been some pushback. I mean, we even sent a letter ourselves noting the differences between that and the model that I think it was mostly influenced by, which is the Washington My Health, My Data Act. There's a lot of incongruencies, a lot of ways that there is actually increasing privacy risks. But health data continues to obviously be a focus for a lot of lawmakers and regulators, as does location data. And location data oftentimes is thought through in relation to these sensitive health information as well, right? Your location to CVS or a reproductive health clinic, for example. But I think like one of the craziest developments that we have seen that I think kind of went under the radar is that the Oregon Consumer Privacy Act banned the sale of precise geolocation. And that's, I think, the first time we've really seen like a strong line ban against a particular type of data point being sold or shared.
um, I get why, you know, there's a goal to ban, because, well, I gave my location to one app. Why, should anyone else, have it and use it? But the reality is, sharing the data at an aggregated level, which again, in theory, would be allowed, sharing the data at an aggregated level, there were lots of crashes in this location. There were traffic slowdowns. Here's how people navigate through the city. If there's an emergency, you need to understand the traffic flows, right? So that's allowed. But here's the problem. When you want to learn a bit more, here's how trucks or commuters, here's how people who are going to work, right? There may be information that you could add in, but now and then aggregate. So now you've shared, right? So there's value for location intelligence for a whole bunch of critical urban planning purposes. We're letting scooters everywhere and these e-bikes, like the e-bikes drive me crazy, right? Because we're all crossing, and then these things are coming, speeding by. If you want to know who's using them, is this all messenger, employees delivering food? Is it people commuting to public transportation and now they're, saving? Is it adding? Is it detracting? What's it doing? You can't assess it, right, without having location information. But to some extent, knowing more so that you can actually build that data set might require some quote unquote sale, with the promise that the results are aggregated at the end, right? But automatically banning sort of the sale puts some real barriers to some of the beneficial uses, whether it's commercial or not. So we don't lobby for or against these things. What we do when we turn to policymakers is what we do when we turn to, you all here listening, or to kind of corporate privacy officers. Our goal is, can we understand, can we help everybody understand what is happening here? What are the trade-offs? What are the pros and cons? And look, if your decision is the risks are big and we have to ban it, that's fine. But, understand, and maybe we'll deal with what we've limited by doing something else. We'll solve the problem. So our goal is help policymakers, anyone who's working at a sophisticated level, understand the complicated intersections, and then go make, hopefully, thoughtful decisions.
Yeah.
The last item that was flagged in our post was, will a federal moratorium steer the AI policy conversation in 2026? So a little bit of news this week, a little bit today, yesterday. One of the VC groups, AZ16, is that how, A16, AZ16, Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz and so forth, put out a proposal that, get a lot of attention since they're super visible.
Yeah, I mean, we're coming back full circle to the top of the conversation here. Obviously, there was the executive order that happened, what was that, last week already, or 2 weeks ago, that really has asked, what are state lawmakers going to do in response? Are they going to pull back? Are they going to be more aggressive? And I think, particularly with the A16Z framework, you are seeing, I believe, a little bit of a tone shift, which is interesting. A16Z has a lot of sway with the White House, with Congress. I would not be surprised to see if this framework translated into some form of some type of bill or framework in Congress. And I think people are seeing how unpopular it can be perceived to just let, AI run wild in consumers' views, right? Whether that is actually true or accurate is subject to debate, but I think we are seeing a little bit of a tone shift towards some form of a light touch AI uniformed approach, which I think most people would agree would be a good thing. It's just, again, devil's in the details, right? How much is it going to create better compliance programs, more protective ones that adds a level of clarity and addresses some of these concerns that a lot of people are concerned with? Or is it going to create more issues, right? A lot of folks are really concerned with the EO trying to preempt some of these state laws is actually going to create more complexity, because now everybody has to track litigation and tracking, the challenges against some of these laws.
At the end of the day, I think our argument is certainty is far more important than people appreciate. And sometimes pushing for the maximum gain, whether you're on the civil society point of view that you want a lot of the protections, or maybe an innovation industry sort of view where you're worried about protections being, limiting what you want to do, getting compromises sooner than later that provide a playing field certainty, as opposed to lots of froth. And you know what happens when that's the situation? Standards end up being set globally, no matter how free the US is to be unregulated. People do business around the world. And if the standard that you need to do is California, well, then everyone's going to comply with California. If it's in Europe or elsewhere, then folks end up trying to do a one size fits all as much as possible, even if the US is unregulated. So we've been off the playing field on some of the AI and privacy structures, and staying off the playing field without having a US model at all. Even if you push back at the other models, the reality is, if I want to be in that market, I got to do X, and I may end up doing that for the US as well. Maybe startups who are just doing business in the US don't think about that, but frankly, it's a global business today. Anyway, thanks for joining me. We're only giving you 30 minutes because the holidays are among us all. And Tatiana, thanks to you and the team. Follow Tatiana, follow Justine, follow Jordan, follow Jordan Wrigley. Tatiana, maybe we'll post. They're all posting some of the really interesting work that we put out. So you can follow it on our blog, but do keep up with the great members of the Ledge team on LinkedIn, where they are often giving you some valuable, timely stuff. Happy holidays, everybody. Happy holidays to you, Tatiana, and talk to you.
Happy holidays.